Taliban retaliated by blowing up a bunch of kids while they were outside playing. I couldn't quite make everything fit. So I just decided God wasn't real. And all I could say was I was going to find who it was, and I was going to kill him and his entire family. My name's Brian Everett. I was born July 13th, 1988 at Union Hospital. My parents were Dave and Kathy Everett. That's me. So for me, growing up, I had my parents, they were together, and I was a middle child, older brother, younger sister. We went to church when I was pretty young. We started at the Nazarene Church in New Philly, but most of my time was spent at Roxford Church, except for also the stint where my dad preached, which was really cool because I was involved. He actually let me preach a few times. So faith was really big for me when I was young. I got baptized, got saved, gift of the Spirit before I hit 7th grade. So it was incredibly cool. Very important to who I was. I took that to school with me a lot, but a big problem for me is when I was born, I also had a cleft palate, and kids always had questions about that, and eventually that turns to teasing, you know what I mean, because you have your groups and somebody has to be made fun of. So I got made fun of that for a lot, and also my belief. So as I started getting older, I felt very alienated because you just spend so much time in school. I couldn't do anything about my cleft palate, but I could stop speaking about Jesus and his love and my faith. So I kind of started doing that. And additionally, one of the mistakes I made when I was growing up is, you want to be a church kid and you want to be involved because that was the place where I felt accepted. But a lot of what I did was reading the Bible instead of studying it. So I was that kid that by the time I hit high school, I had read the Bible back to front like 5 or 6 times, but I missed the value of understanding it's a story front to back. So I started having a lot of questions because there was the problem was, and it wasn't so much our preacher, he pushed back against it a lot, but what was wanted from like the board and higher up was a lot more legalistic stuff that zeroed in on the Bible in parts, and there was a level of disconnect. So when you do that, the Old Testament becomes very separate from the New Testament, at least it was for me. So I really started having questions, but I didn't feel like it was okay to ask them. I didn't like the doubt I started having because your Christianity as an identity instead of who you are makes you think, oh, you're going to hell. You have these questions that you want to ask that you don't understand, and that's just doubt, so you're not a good Christian all of a sudden asking for help or anything like that, because you should be able to turn to God and your faith should be unwavering. So as I'm packing away all of my beliefs in public so I can be accepted there, I started to lose a lot of my identity as a Christian and started drifting away from that. So by the time I'm in my last few years of high school, I'm sneaking out, really betraying my parents' trust because they trusted me to party, to drink, to smoke. I moved out when I was in my senior year of high school and really started partying. So, and the group I fell in with was not a great group. They had their own struggles and things like that. A couple of them were having their own problems with their faith. So we really formed this very unhealthy, codependent, what do I say? I like to use the word community just because a lot of my studying is based on that. A lot of what the value of the church is community. So in my loneliness, I ended up getting sucked into all these addictions, looking for a place that I belonged. After graduating for a few years, I joined the Army, spent a lot of money partying and everything like that. Wasn't very disciplined, so I jumped around from job to job. So I ran out of money, and also at that same time, the 2008 collapse happened, so there weren't a whole lot of opportunities. So between the two, I figured I could have a stable job and I could learn some discipline. Basic training was rough. I definitely didn't feel like I belonged. I definitely felt like I was behind the 8 ball. I'm just like, phew, I may have made a mistake here. But I pushed myself through just because I've always been stubborn. And it wasn't until we did the final ruck march and graduation was coming. We were getting ready to pack up to go to our advanced training stations, and some of the guys were talking to our senior drill sergeant, and he was giving advice before we moved on how to be good soldiers and have a career. And I was just like packing stuff up, and I was near the front of the bay where they were talking, just because we do alphabetical order. And a question came up about what to do in combat, like how to survive and things like that. He talked about, it's quite simple. We've already trained you, how to respond, react, keep a cool head. But then he said, know who to follow the dangerous ones. And then out of nowhere, he points to me and he goes, the dangerous ones like Everett. And I stopped. I looked at him and I was very confused, you know what I mean? Because I didn't realize where I was. I was just pushing my way through. And he looks at me dead in the eyes and he goes, there's a monster inside of you, Everett. He says, don't be afraid to let it out. It'll keep you alive. And that's the first real individual identity I had in years. So it went on. I became a medic. I actually got advice from one of the cadre there. He said, if you want your guys to trust you, you got to drink with them. You got to spend time with them. Like, that was the big activity, and said, but if you want them to love you, you got to drink them under the table. So that's something I really took to heart. It's a big part of the culture. One of the things is you get torn down when you're training, and above all, you lose real emotional responses when you get military training. Sadness, despair, those are useless. Those are things that'll shut you down, that'll get you killed, that'll get people around you killed. So generally everything gets funneled into anger. So, when there are any issues at work, when there's any issues with other people, the instantaneous response is anger. And a lot of what you do to deal with that is drinking. It's a huge part of the culture. Even like underage drinking is really big in the Army. So I really, really played into that. And then, a few years of that before I deployed to Afghanistan in 2011. It was March 2011. Around that same time too, I also got married. I had been dating someone for a couple years. It was messy. We did love each other, but also we too were both lost, looking for an identity. And I did really love her, but also a thing I learned about myself as I've grown and I came back to Christ and had a real identity is the thing I loved most about her was how in love she was with me. Because I had such a longing that I constantly had to be poured into. But I deployed around that time. It was rough. Went to a place called Katmani. Guys that had been there said the combat was so intense. When people came and showed up, they said, welcome to Katmati, here's your Purple Heart, which was very true. One of our guys got wounded like the first month in. There were several casualties. But the worst day came a few months in. We had a mass cow scenario with kids in the village. Their elders had come to us like a couple days beforehand. They were having issues with a failed crop, so they were looking for seed and stuff to help them start over because it was a agricultural community, and the Taliban retaliated by blowing up a bunch of kids while they were outside playing. When I heard the call for the mass cow, I went up to the aid station, and the very first thing I saw was a little girl on a stretcher. And I went to check on her, and she was pretty much dead, clinically dead. So stepped over her, went to start working on the next kid. He was maybe, gosh, it's so hard to tell, because like Afghan kids are much smaller than their American contemporaries. Like stress, malnutrition, they're they don't live in a very good environment, and that we don't think about it often just because of how things are in America. But it really affects kids growing up, especially their development. But I start working on him. His legs were all shredded up with shrapnel. And start doing pressure dressings. He's yelling, but that was a good sign because his airway's open, and I'm observing the rise and fall of his chest. His breathing was rapid and shallow, but that's to be given in the middle of a trauma response like that. And then he had some venous bleeding, so I got that under control, wrapped him in a blanket to stabilize him. And we got all the kids, the other three, sent out. The Afghan army had to drive them to the hospital because we didn't have any helicopters. But the little girl, she died while we were fully died while we were working on the other kids. And she's in the body bag, and no one else. We're all just standing around. Felt like forever before any of us could make a move, and the only ones that would pick up the body bag was me and Sergeant Isler. And this dude, he was technical and proficient. He was almost that quintessential sergeant you see in your war movies and stuff like that. But that day was different. I had never seen him flinch, even in incoming fire, and we're carrying this bag out, and I just remember him walking backwards, just tears streaming down his face, saying, "It's just a deer, it's just a deer, it's just a deer." And I'll never forget that. I went back to my guys, went back to the gun line, and they asked me what happened. I said, "Hey, it was a bunch of kids." That's all I could really say. I didn't even stop. I just kept walking, and I went and started lighting up cigarettes and drinking coffee because that was my thinking space. And a couple of the guys came and checked on me. I don't remember what any of them said, but I was trying to make sense of everything. I had not done great in my faith, but I hadn't really ever renounced God. I just kind of lingered in the middle of all those questions and did the whole good person thing. But I couldn't quite make everything fit. So I just decided God wasn't real. And the bottom dropped out of my soul right there and then. And I descended into a pretty deep spiritual darkness. I got injured while I was there. I got access to tramadol to help treat me, but I also, as a medic, needed more so I could take care of one of the casualty collection points that I had. But I started abusing it. For me, I didn't know at the time that it was habit forming. They were lauding it as this non-habit forming painkiller because pharmaceutical industry is a joke. But in time, that wasn't enough. So one of the guys started sharing with me Vicodins that his wife was smuggling to him in these Skittle bags. But their marriage ended not too long after that, and that supply stopped. But it was like a really long year. I definitely leaned on that whole monster thing, especially because not too long after that incident happened with all the kids, I got a hold of my wife back home, and she had told me that she had cheated on me and that she was pregnant. She had told me before she was pregnant, but she let me think it was my kid. So that was one of the few pieces of hope I was holding on to. And all I could say was I was going to find who it was, and I was going to kill him and his entire family. I think I think one of the things I was addicted to most was just my anger and my rage, because it was my armor. It made things controllable, at least that's what I told myself. But it's not very edifying. It's always abstractive, and it takes a lot out of you to be angry all the time, to be fighting everyone all the time. And in all that, by the time I redeployed to Schofield Barracks, I was drinking a lot. And I was putting myself to sleep with like at least a 6-pack a night, and that was during the duty week. On the weekends, I was just unfunctionally drunk, which was weird because when I first got back, I hit it very well. The thing in addiction is there's a functional point where it starts, but you can lie to yourself and other people enough and hide it. Like, I was the medic people would ask for by name to like do coverage and things like that. I even helped a bunch of guys that were, because drug addiction runs really rampant in the military, so guys that were addicted to heroin, guys that were using cocaine, I took them to rehab, because if you did it and admitted it, it would save your career. So, but meantime, in that whole time, I was lying to myself. I got to a point where I was missing formations, and the only thing that saved me from not getting kicked out is I was seeking mental health. But it was a bandage, and again, that counseling only goes so far if you're not honest with yourself. So I would go and feel better, or I would say it because that's what I was supposed to, but nothing ever really changed. So by the time I got home, I was a mess. I just wanted to ignore everything, go back to normal as it was, but drinking a lot, and I didn't realize like how in pain I was, and people would try to tell me, and I would just not even shrug them off. I'd get mad because I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want that to be the reality. So the first few months back, I was still like trying to get a hold of painkillers and stuff. It's interesting because the only reason I ever got away from that is I started seeing how many people, because I had it personally affecting family members, but just seeing how many people were dead or had become addicted to painkillers and heroin in our community, because it's that really big hump I had missed because I was gone. So I realized I had to stop doing that. So I just started drinking more, a lot of marijuana, pot smoking at that time. But even that kind of stuff wasn't enough. Between guilt about what I had done in Afghanistan and about what happened with me and my wife, I felt really unlovable. So I really sought that out in relationships. I became addicted to sex, used a lot of women for that. And what was really terrible was there were a couple of relationships where I was with people that were very loving and very kind, but the problem is nothing changed because I had that bottomless pit in me. So they would pour out into me till the point where they were almost empty and I couldn't give anything back, and it didn't change anything, and eventually I would just leave. I was unfaithful a lot. And, you're constantly fighting, you're constantly angry. I got to a point where I was so upset and couldn't make amends with myself about what my ex-wife had done to me. I actually started seeking out women that were dating, women that were married. I ruined a lot of relationships. And the sad thing is it was just like the sex was never edifying, and it was only destructive. And I was basically on a warpath through life. And yeah. So I got to a point finally where I just kind of gave up. I went into a spiritual comatose. I had this sensation not long after I got out of the Army where I was feeling like I was being chased. So I never felt like I could stay in one place too long. I bounced around to a lot of jobs, moved to a lot of different places. I just assumed, I was supposed to die, and somehow that had missed me in Afghanistan. So I was always trying to stay ahead of that, but my brother-in-law got me a job in, was that like the end of 2016, and I just kind of resigned myself. I waited for that chasing feeling to catch up with me and just for it to end. Late 2017, I really had my world rocked. A close friend of mine from school, Lacey, she got cancer. She had liver cancer. It metastasized to her lung. And a few months later, she was dead. We were close. She lived right by my best friend. She was someone she was someone I talked to all the time. We had a lot of shared interests. She was someone that was always patient with me when I was at my worst, and forgiving. Like, there's a lot she forgave me of. And it just rocked me because she was a pharmacy tech. And she died just feet away from the medicine she needed. And, like, the insurance she had wouldn't really let her take the time off or see a doctor to get a little cough checked out that she'd had for months. So I got mad, and I wanted things to change. So 2018, I went back to school. I sought a degree in political science. I wanted to change things. One of the big things for me became, what was the nature of evil in people? You know, you understand that maybe you could kill it. You know, the understanding that great capacity for like good and evil resides in everyone. And an interesting thing started to happen though. You know, as I stared at the brokenness of the world, it really reflected the brokenness in me. Really started examining the lives of like the worst people, and it's strange when you step outside the historical narratives of needing a bad guy and understanding how human the worst people were. Really rocks you. So I went on this philosophical academic journey, and I descended into like a really deep, dark place. And it was like a spiritual darkness. It was so dark, like you could barely see your hand in front of your face. And as these terrible people became more human to me, I got to the center of that darkness, and something finally took shape. And what appeared, where all that evil came from, was, for me, wasn't a demon or a dragon. It was me. I had done all those awful things. I had made that choice. And for the first time in a long time, I felt really ashamed at all the things I had done. So I said I needed to change. But an interesting thing happens, you know, in modern objective morality it's truly subjective. You get to say you're the good person. Interesting thing for me, though, is I knew I needed to change, that I was fundamentally, even when I was at my worst, I was fundamentally a good person. This is just the way the world was. You specifically lean into how awful everyone else is, and that's just the way people are. So you're not really that bad. You justify by everyone being like you of the world, you know, as we say. As the Bible says, that's just the way it is. So you just do your best, which just kind of feeds into just how awful the world is, because it's just a cumulative action of all that. So, and you don't really ever have any real joy. The only times I would say I was happy is when I needed to argue with people telling me that I needed Jesus again. You know, that true joy found in him. Because, you know, and you look at the world and everyone's always making jokes about wanting to die and everything like that. And I see it now too in a lot of people. The only time that people will willingly say, I am happy, is when they're trying to win that argument. I needed to confront something I had done to a friend of mine in that whole, I don't know how else to call it, just sexual rampage and that addiction. I had actually slept with one of his exes, and they had been very close, and they had had a long relationship, and it's not something that just happened. It's something I intentionally did. So I wanted to tell him, because he had been a very good friend for a long time, and I knew I needed things to change. So I was going to tell him. I invited him over. We were going to go see a Browns game, and I was ready for the friendship to be over, just because I was like, oh, how awful and how terrible and how wicked you are. And I was sitting there the day beforehand. I was just drinking. I was smoking marijuana. I was chain smoking cigarettes. I was just like oppressed with such a fear and a terror of doing this thing. But I had committed myself to being honest about it. And, you know, my vision began to narrow. My heart started like beating out of my chest. When the EMTs came, they said it was a panic attack. I'd never had one of those before. But when I was laying on the floor, I literally collapsed onto the floor. And my buddy Mike is checking on me. We were medics together in Afghanistan, and I'd never seen him afraid in his life. And I thought this was it. I thought I was going to die. And I called out to God to forgive me. And I turned and I looked, and as I was doing that, I could just see him clearly there. I could see Jesus, and I realized that sensation that had been chasing that all that time was him. You know, he had never left me. He had never forsaken me. And that's real love. Because I was not someone worth loving. I think about him paying the price for all my sins, and it's just like, he lived a sinless life. Like, I willingly turned my back on what I knew was right, the truth in the gospel, and still he died for me. And you know, it's not a guilt, but it's an overwhelming love, because it's like, not me. You don't die for me. Like, you were sinless, you were innocent. And because when I was growing up, our names are written in the book of life. All of our sins are blotted out. And for me, the idea was always just like, you're in a courtroom and you're guilty, and Jesus stands up and says, no, this man's innocent. That's what his crucifixion and resurrection did, but that's not the truth. In the crucifixion, he stands up in the court and says, I'll serve this man's sentence. That's real love. I could spend all day on that. It's just such a beautiful thing. It's the most perfect gift I've ever received. And it's funny because sometimes the flesh worries about what you get in life, but the Spirit knows that if I got nothing else, that I'd have everything. But anyways, so that was the moment I turned back to God, because for me, academically, I spent a lot of time in philosophy and politics and things like that, trying to find the truth. And you have to be honest with yourself. At the moment of your death, if you turn to God, you call out to Him, you believe in God, So I started back on the path towards God. And the problem is I was very much stuck in that legalistic sense I grew up with. I didn't have a real relationship. I knew God was there, but I was very much a works-based Christian. So I was still doing a lot of what I was doing before, but God was there. And don't worry, I'm going to do all the stuff you need me to do and things like that. I was still getting high. I was drinking less because I was in school, but I was high every day. I smoked so much I would smoke myself into panic attacks just because it was never enough. God was still so good. He gave me a lot of opportunities to serve in politics. I was deputy director of elections in Harrison County. I'd served with Job and Family Services. And being a works-based Christian at that time, I couldn't give things to him, so I got some really hard cases. And I do believe, too, that a faith-based community is the most important, because you have to escape your thought process, those lies you give yourself that build that addiction, and that's the renewing of the mind. Because if you don't change your thinking, then you won't change your habits, and if you don't change your habits, you won't build new thinking. So I really got defeated. I started drinking a lot while I was out there. I had one particular instance where, because I had some roommates there, I was having a rough night. I literally drank myself to the point where I passed out. Not a very Christ-centered life. About the same time, too, Afghanistan fell to the Taliban, and I had to confront a lot of what I did. I used to have this guilt about stuff I had done, and I used to have this idea. It was just a very intense moral and spiritual exercise where I realized the people we were fighting were still people, and I had this image of these two sons that were just waiting for their dad to come home that was never going to come home. And that really bothered me, because it was hard to reconcile that I did what needed to be done, but what did I do that was really any good in that violence, especially that Afghanistan was falling? And there was a piece of footage of the Taliban coming in Afghanistan. On the back of the truck, there were two young men that would have been kids about the time I was there, just sitting on the truck, riding in, and I saw that same lifeless, blank, cold stare that I used to have. And for me, it became very real all of a sudden that there they were. And I realized that man-made morality, the need to vanquish your enemy, hadn't produced anything except more pain and violence. And that really ate at me. So between that and being unable to help the clients that I had, I was walking home one day, and I just had this very intense, spiritual moment, and I saw a vision of my life. It was a field, and I saw all the people I'd ever encountered and all the things I'd ever done. It was a battlefield. It was wrecked as far as the eye could see, just nothing but ruin. And that was the monument to my life, just a desolate field full of nothing but pain and misery. And a thought took hold, which was, no matter what I did, I couldn't seem to make a better world. So really was the only thing I could do to make a better world, make a world without me. And I heard the voice of God distinctly speak, "Brian." And I came to my senses, and I realized I was about to step into traffic to kill myself, which, that's something the enemy would love. And he said it was time to come home. So I came home at the end of 2021, and I thought I had screwed everything up, God's plan, everything for me. And it was really rough when I first came back. So I ended up here at Celebrate Recovery and coming to church. And actually, it's really funny. The first time I came wrecked me. It's the first time I had a spiritual encounter with God for a long time. It was so intense, and I had gotten so, what is it? Well, because I was still works-based and I was still flesh-based, even though I believed. It was so, I almost got up and left because it was almost too much. But I forgot what authentic encounter with God felt like. It's that thing that I struggled with that makes me really sad that you see in a lot of people in churches is they want a radical blessing from God, but absolutely do not want a radical encounter with God. But that radical encounter is the gift. It's the best. You gotta have him wreck you. One of the things I've had to learn is just, we say surrender your life to him, but so often we want to take the wheel. For me, I won't speak to other people, but for me, trying to take the wheel and try and still do the plans in my way, still trying to shed that works-based idea, because his plans always work out for the best. But yeah, so that's me. That's my testimony. That's my death to life.